That old watch doesn't work anymore, Grandpa. Time to upgrade. The teenager's voice carried across the coffee shop as he pointed at the scratched metal timepiece on the old man's wrist. Laughter rippled through his group as they filmed with their phones. No one intervened. No one said a word. The elderly man sat quietly at the corner table, weathered hands, silver hair, wearing a simple flannel shirt that had seen better decades. His fingers unconsciously covered the watch face, protecting what looked like an ordinary piece of worn steel with a cracked leather band that had been repaired countless times. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The tile floor felt cold beneath expensive sneakers as the teenagers circled closer, still recording. Seriously, what year is that thing from? The Stone Age? The old man remained silent. His thumb traced the watch's edge where faint engravings were barely visible beneath layers of scratches and time. He didn't know that across the room, a young Marine in civilian clothes had just recognized those markings. Before we continue, if you believe respect shouldn't depend on appearance or age, type honor below and tell me where you're watching from. This story hits different when I know who's standing with people like William. I read every comment. William Harrison had been sitting in that same corner for 43 minutes. Same table he chose every time he visited this place. Not because the coffee was good. It wasn't. Not because the atmosphere was welcoming. It clearly wasn't. He came because this was where they used to meet. The watch on his wrist hadn't kept proper time since 1971. The crown was bent, the crystal cracked, and the second hand stuttered between each tick. But it still ran. Somehow, it still ran, just like the promise he'd made. The teenagers were getting bolder now. One of them, a kid with an expensive haircut and designer clothes, pulled out his phone and started recording closer. "This is going viral, dude. Look at this ancient piece of junk." William's jaw tightened, not from anger. From the effort it took to stay still, he'd learned long ago that some battles aren't worth fighting, that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is your own reaction, that silence can be stronger than any weapon. But his thumb kept moving across the watch face, over the scratches that told stories these kids couldn't read, over the dent from shrapnel that missed his heart by 3 inches, over the inscription on the back that he'd memorized but never forgot. Time stands still for no one, except brothers. J.K. The waitress approached the table hesitantly. She was young, maybe 19, with nervous hands and apologetic eyes. "Sir, I'm sorry about them. Do you need anything?" William looked up at her. Really looked. "Just coffee," he said quietly. "Black." His voice was gravelly, weathered, the kind that carried weight without raising volume. The kind that spoke of orders given and received in places where coffee was a luxury and silence was survival. "Of course," she whispered, and hurried away. The teenagers were still filming, still laughing, still making jokes about outdated technology and old people who couldn't let go of the past. They didn't know they were recording a legend. They didn't know that Watch had been through 3 combat zones, 2 prisoner camps, and 1 impossible extraction that saved 11 lives. They didn't know that William Harrison had been Sergeant Major William Harrison, that he'd carried wounded men across minefields, that he'd held dying friends in his arms while calling in coordinates for artillery strikes that would save hundreds. They didn't know that the ancient piece of junk on his wrist was a Hamilton GCT military chronometer issued to special operations personnel for missions that didn't exist on paper. They just saw an old man who looked like an easy target. That's when the young Marine across the room stood up. His name was Jake Anderson, 24 years old, fresh back from Afghanistan. Still adjusting to civilian life, still figuring out how to order coffee without scanning for exits. But he recognized that watch. He'd seen one exactly like it in a display case at Quantico, part of an exhibit about covert operations in Southeast Asia. The placard had mentioned a unit called Phantom Company, men who'd operated behind enemy lines for months at a time, with nothing but their training, their brothers, and their watches to keep them connected to home. Jake walked over slowly. His military bearing was unmistakable. Even in jeans and a t-shirt, he moved with purpose and precision. The teenagers noticed him approaching. Their laughter died down. "Excuse me," Jake said, looking directly at William. "Is that a Hamilton GCT?" William's eyes snapped up, sharp, alert, measuring. "Might be," he said carefully. "My grandfather carried one," Jake lied smoothly. "In Vietnam." Never saw another one in person. It wasn't true, but it was the right thing to say. The teenagers were quiet now, sensing a shift they didn't understand. William studied Jake's face. Took in the haircut, the posture, the way he stood with his feet slightly apart and his hands relaxed but ready. "What unit?" William asked. "2nd Battalion, 7th Marines," Jake replied. "Good unit," William said simply. The acknowledgement hung in the air like a salute. The teenager with the phone wasn't ready to give up his viral moment. "Hey, military boy!" he called out, voice dripping with teenage arrogance. "You gonna defend Grandpa's broken clock? Maybe you've got some antique gear too?" Jake turned slowly. When Marines turn slowly, it's never a good sign. "That's not a clock," he said, voice steady but with an edge. "And he's not your entertainment." "Oh, what is it then? Some kind of special tactical timepiece?" The kid laughed, but it sounded forced now, less confident. William remained silent. His thumb still traced the watch face, but his eyes were alert now, watching, calculating. Jake stepped closer to the teenagers, not threatening, just present. "You know what? You're right. It is special. That's a military chronometer, standard issue for special operations personnel during the Vietnam War. Men who operated in classified missions that you'll never read about in history books." The teenagers exchanged glances. The recording was still going, but the mood had shifted. "Prove it," the main kid challenged, but his voice was smaller now. That's when William spoke. "Jake," he said quietly. The single word cut through the coffee shop noise like a blade. Jake turned. "Show them your ink." Jake hesitated for a moment, then slowly he rolled up his left sleeve. There, in black ink just below his elbow, was a tattoo, an eagle, globe, and anchor. The Marine Corps emblem. Below it, coordinates. Below that, names. "These are the coordinates where I lost my best friend," Jake said quietly. "These names are the men who didn't come home with me." The coffee shop had gone silent. "Now look at his watch," Jake continued, nodding toward William. William held up his wrist. In the light, the engraving on the side was just barely visible, a small eagle etched deep into the metal. That eagle means he earned the right to wear that watch, in places where wearing it could get you killed, with men who trusted him with their lives. The teenager's phone was still recording, but he'd lowered it. I didn't know," he mumbled. "No," William said, speaking for the first time to the kids directly. "You didn't." His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was just tired. "But now you do." The main teenager looked around the coffee shop. Everyone was watching now. His viral moment had become something else entirely. "Look, man, we were just—" "Having fun," William finished. "I know." He stood up slowly. The watch caught the light as he moved. "When I was your age, I thought old things were worthless too. Thought new was always better. Thought the past was just something that slowed you down." He looked at each of the teenagers in turn. "Then I learned that some old things carry stories. Some broken things still work when everything else fails. Some outdated gear is the difference between coming home and not coming home." Jake watched William with growing respect. This wasn't just an old veteran. This was a leader. Someone who'd commanded men in impossible situations and brought them home. "What unit were you in, sir?" Jake asked. William smiled for the first time. It was a sad smile, but genuine. "5th Special Forces Group. Phantom Company. We didn't officially exist." The words hung in the air like a confession. Jake's eyes widened. He'd heard whispers about Phantom Company, legends passed down through military generations, stories about impossible missions and men who could disappear into enemy territory for months at a time. "Sir," Jake said, and his voice had changed. It carried respect now, recognition. The teenagers had gone completely quiet. The phone was no longer recording. "The watch," one of them said quietly. "It really is special." William looked at him. "It's not the watch that's special, son. It's what it remembers." He sat back down slowly, placing the watch flat on the table where everyone could see it. "Want to know what it remembers?" The watch had been a gift, not from the government, not from the military, from a brother. James Kevin Murphy. Everyone called him Murphy. 22 years old, red hair, freckles, smile that could light up a bunker. From Boston. Talked constantly about his girl back home, about the ring he was saving up to buy her, about the life he was going to build when the war was over. Murphy had been a watchmaker before the Army. His father owned a small shop in South Boston, repairing timepieces for 3 generations. Murphy could take apart a chronometer blindfolded and put it back together in the dark. "Time is the most honest thing in the world," Murphy used to say while working on their equipment by lamplight. "It doesn't lie. It doesn't play favorites. It just keeps moving forward whether you're ready or not." The watch had been Murphy's personal timepiece. Hamilton GCT, military specification, but modified by his father with custom gearing and a reinforced case. Murphy had carried it through basic training, through special operations selection, through 6 months of classified missions in Laos and Cambodia. "When we get out of here," Murphy had said on their last night together, "I'm going to give this to my son. Teach him that time is precious, that every second counts, that you can't waste time on things that don't matter." But Murphy never made it home. William's voice was quiet as he told the story. The teenagers had pulled up chairs. Jake stood at attention, listening like it was a briefing. "We were deep in enemy territory. Extraction point was compromised. Radio was down. Murphy and I were the only ones left from our team." William's thumb traced the watch face as he spoke. "We found an abandoned village, supposed to be empty. But there were kids there, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Their parents were gone. They were starving. The coffee shop was dead silent. Command wanted us to move to the secondary extraction point, leave the kids. Complete the mission, come home." William paused, took a sip of cold coffee. Murphy wouldn't do it, said those kids reminded him of his little sister, said we couldn't leave them. Jake knew where this was heading. He'd heard similar stories from older Marines, stories about impossible choices in impossible places. So we stayed, called in for emergency evac, waited 3 days for the choppers while enemy patrols searched for us. William's voice got quieter. "On the 3rd day they found us. Murphy told me to take the kids and run, said he'd hold them off, give us time to reach the LZ. The watch seemed heavier on the table now. He gave me his watch before I left. Said, 'Make sure this gets home. Make sure someone remembers we were here.'" William looked up at the teenagers. "I was supposed to give it to his family. But when I got back to the States, I found out Murphy had lied about having family. The girl back home had married someone else while he was deployed. His father had died of a heart attack 6 months earlier." The watch shop was closed. One of the teenagers wiped his eyes. "So I kept it. Promised Murphy I'd carry it until I found the right person to pass it to. Someone who understood what it meant." William looked at Jake. 47 years I've carried this watch. 47 years I've been looking for someone worthy of Murphy's sacrifice." Jake's throat was tight. "Sir, Murphy saved 17 lives that day," William continued. 9 kids and 8 civilians we evacuated with them. Those kids grew up to become doctors, teachers, engineers. They had children of their own, grandchildren. William stood up and walked around the table. "Murphy's watch has been keeping time for all of them. Every second, every minute, every hour they got to live was because of what he did." He stopped in front of Jake. That's what this old, broken watch remembers. Not time. Lives. Hope. Sacrifice. William held out the watch. Murphy would want it to go to someone who understands that time isn't about the seconds that pass. It's about the moments that matter. Jake's hands trembled as he accepted the watch. "Sir, I can't." "You can," William said firmly. "And you will, because that's what brothers do." Phantom Company had been created in 1969 for missions that couldn't officially exist. 12 men, hand-picked from special forces units across the military. Their job was simple in theory, impossible in practice: infiltrate enemy territory, gather intelligence, and get out without leaving any trace they'd ever been there. William had been 24 when he was selected, the youngest sergeant ever assigned to the unit. He'd already completed 2 tours in Vietnam, earned a Silver Star for valor, and demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that caught the attention of people whose names didn't appear on organizational charts. The selection process for Phantom Company was brutal. 6 months of training in facilities that didn't exist, learning techniques that weren't in any manual. How to live off the land for weeks at a time. How to move through enemy territory without being detected. How to kill silently, if necessary, but more importantly, how to avoid having to kill at all. "We weren't commandos," William explained to his rapt audience. "We were ghosts. Our success was measured by how little evidence we left behind that we'd ever been there." Murphy had been selected for his technical skills. Every covert mission needed someone who could repair equipment in the field, modify radios for extended range, and keep chronometers accurate under extreme conditions. But Murphy brought something else to the team, an unshakable optimism that kept morale up during the darkest moments. Murphy could find something to laugh about in the middle of a firefight, William remembered. Not because he didn't take things seriously, but because he understood that laughter was sometimes the only thing standing between sanity and breakdown. Their unit had been deployed to regions of Southeast Asia that weren't supposed to have American military presence, operations that required congressional deniability. Missions where getting captured meant disappearing forever because the United States would never acknowledge they'd been there. For 18 months, Phantom Company operated behind enemy lines. They gathered intelligence on supply routes, identified key targets for airstrikes, and occasionally extracted civilians or captured American personnel from areas too dangerous for conventional rescue operations. They lost their first man in month 6. Rodriguez, the medic, stepped on a mine while treating wounded civilians in a village that had been caught in crossfire between American forces and North Vietnamese regulars. They buried him in an unmarked grave and reported his death as occurring during a training accident back in the States. The second loss was Thompson, their communications specialist. Shot by a sniper while setting up radio equipment to call in medical evacuation for a wounded teammate. They carried his body for 3 days through enemy territory to reach an extraction point, refusing to leave him behind. By month 15, Phantom Company was down to 6 men. But they'd successfully completed 27 missions, saved over 100 civilian lives, and provided intelligence that prevented 3 major offensives against American positions. "We weren't heroes," William said, looking directly at Jake. "We were just soldiers doing an impossible job with inadequate resources and no backup. But we had each other. That was enough." The final mission was supposed to be routine. Intelligence gathering in a region where enemy activity had been minimal, in and out in 72 hours. Simple reconnaissance, but intelligence was wrong. The area was crawling with enemy forces. Phantom Company walked into an ambush on their first day in country. Within 6 hours, they were down to 2 men, William and Murphy. "We had 2 choices," William continued, his voice steady but haunted. "Complete the mission and get to extraction, or risk everything to save 9 children who had no business being in a war zone." William looked at the watch in Jake's hands. "Murphy made the choice for both of us. He said we didn't join the military to abandon kids. We joined to protect them." The coffee shop was silent, except for the quiet hum of machinery and the distant sounds of traffic. "Murphy bought us time, cost him everything. But those kids lived." They grew up in a world where Murphy's sacrifice meant something. William paused. That's what that watch remembers. Every tick is another second those kids got to live because Murphy chose to be a hero instead of a survivor. That's when the young woman behind the counter dropped her coffee pot. It shattered against the tile floor, sending ceramic fragments and hot coffee across the room. But she didn't move to clean it up. She just stood there, staring at William with wide eyes and tears streaming down her face. "Did you say Murphy?" she whispered. "James Kevin Murphy? From Boston?" William's head snapped up. "How do you know that name?" The young woman stepped carefully around the broken ceramic, her hands shaking. "My grandmother," she said quietly. "Her name was Lin Nguyen. She used to tell me stories about 2 American soldiers who saved her and 8 other children during the war. She said one of them was named Murphy. Red hair, always smiling, always talking about his watch." The air in the coffee shop seemed to freeze. William stood up slowly, his face pale. "Lin Nguyen, about 9 years old in 1971. Had a scar on her left hand from a piece of shrapnel." The young woman nodded, crying openly now. "She passed away 2 years ago, but before she died, she made me promise something." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. "She said if I ever met an American soldier who mentioned Murphy's watch, I should give him this." William's hands trembled as he accepted the envelope. His name was written on the front in careful, precise handwriting. Sergeant William Harrison. "She never forgot you," the young woman said. "She named her son Kevin after Murphy, my father. She became a doctor, like she always dreamed, helped thousands of children throughout her life. She said it was because 2 soldiers taught her that strangers could be heroes." William opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a photograph of a small girl holding hands with 2 American soldiers in jungle fatigues. The soldiers' faces were young, barely visible beneath combat gear, but one of them wore a familiar watch. Below the photograph was a letter, written in English with the careful penmanship of someone who had learned the language as an adult. "Dear Sergeant Harrison, I do not know if you survived the war. I do not know if you ever made it home. But I know that you and Murphy saved my life and the lives of 8 other children on March 15, 1971. I want you to know that we lived. We grew up. We had families. We became doctors and teachers and engineers, just like Murphy said we would. I want you to know that Murphy's sacrifice was not wasted. Every life I saved as a doctor was possible because he saved me first. Every child I helped was Murphy's legacy continuing. I want you to know that in my family, we remember 2 American heroes who chose love over duty, who chose children over safety, who chose to be human in an inhuman time. If you are reading this letter, please know that Murphy's watch kept perfect time. It gave us 47 years of life that we would not have had without him. Please know that you are remembered. Please know that you are loved. Please know that Murphy's sacrifice mattered." With eternal gratitude, Dr. Lin Nguyen William read the letter twice before he could speak. When he finally looked up, the entire coffee shop was watching him. The teenagers, Jake, the waitresses, customers at other tables, everyone had gathered around to witness this impossible moment. "Her granddaughter," William said, looking at the young woman behind the counter. "You're Murphy's legacy, too." She nodded. "My name is Sarah Nguyen. I'm pre-med at the local university because of stories my grandmother told me about heroes who saved children." Jake stepped forward. "Sir, this changes everything. This watch isn't just a memorial, it's proof that heroes live on through the people they save." William looked at the watch in Jake's hands, then at Sarah, then at the teenagers who had been filming when this all started. "Turn your camera back on," he said to the main kid. "Sir, turn it on. Record this. Because this story needs to be told. Not about me, not about Murphy, about the ripple effects of doing the right thing when everything else is wrong." The teenager's hands shook as he started recording again. "This is what heroism looks like," William said, looking directly into the camera. "It doesn't end when the hero dies. It continues through every life they touched, every person they saved, every choice they inspired others to make. He turned to Jake. That watch belongs to you now, but the story belongs to all of us. 3 months later, the coffee shop looked different. On the wall behind the counter hung a framed photograph. 2 young soldiers in jungle fatigues, one with red hair and freckles, the other serious and determined. Below it, a brass plaque read, "In memory of James Kevin Murphy and all who choose courage over comfort. Their time was not wasted." Sarah Nguyen had organized the memorial, but it had grown into something larger. The local Veterans Administration had gotten involved. The American Legion Post had contributed funds. Even the teenagers who had started everything with their thoughtless joke had pitched in money from part-time jobs to help pay for the plaque. William Harrison visited every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Same table, same black coffee, but the atmosphere was completely different. Other veterans had started joining him, not for formal meetings or organized discussions, just for coffee with someone who understood. Jake Anderson still wore Murphy's watch. He'd had it professionally serviced by a watchmaker who specialized in military timepieces. It kept perfect time now, but Jake had been careful to preserve every scratch, every mark that told its history. "Time isn't about the seconds that pass," Jake would tell people when they asked about the watch. "It's about the moments that matter." The teenagers had learned something, too. The main kid, whose name was Dylan, had started volunteering at the local VA hospital. He brought his camera, but now he used it to record veterans' stories for an oral history project instead of trying to embarrass people for social media. "I used to think old meant worthless," Dylan explained to anyone who would listen. "Now I know old means experienced, tested, proven." Sarah was in her final year of pre-med studies. She'd chosen pediatrics as her specialty, inspired by her grandmother's stories and William's quiet heroism. During busy study periods, she would touch the small watch pendant she wore around her neck, a gift from Jake, made from a piece of Murphy's original watch band that had been replaced during the repair. The ripple effects continued spreading. The video Dylan had recorded that day, the story of Murphy's watch and the reunion with Lynn's granddaughter, had been viewed over 2 million times. But it wasn't the viral fame he'd originally wanted. It was something better. A reminder that every person carries stories worth respecting. Comments poured in from veterans around the world, from families of fallen soldiers, from people who had been inspired to reach out to elderly neighbors they'd previously ignored. The American Legion Post had started a program called Murphy's Watch, pairing young veterans with older ones, creating mentorship relationships that honored the past while preparing for the future. William had been asked to speak at high schools and community centers about his experiences. He always brought Jake with him, and they always ended their presentations the same way. "Heroes aren't born," William would say. "They're made by the choices they make when those choices matter most." Jake would add, "And heroism doesn't end when the hero dies. It continues through every life they touched, every person they inspired, every moment they made possible." On this particular Tuesday, William sat at his usual table with an unusual addition, a young girl, maybe 8 years old, with Sarah's eyes and Lynn's determined expression. "Tell me about the watch again, Grandpa William," she said, using the honorary title Sarah had taught her. William smiled and began the story one more time, about Murphy and sacrifice, about time and memory, about the difference between surviving and living. Jake checked Murphy's watch. 3:47 p.m. Time for the story to continue. Across the room, Dylan set up his camera to record another chapter in the ongoing legacy of heroes who chose to be human in an inhuman world. To everyone who typed honor and shared where you're watching from, thank you for standing with our heroes. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.